We have for several weeks now been talking about broken heroes. Those individuals in the Bible that for one reason or another had their lives broken, sometimes very often because of things that others did. And yet the brokenness of humanity seems to be a very common theme that we find in a lot of places. And so we've been talking about these heroes. Today we're going to be talking about David. And there is something unique about David. Though he was very good, he also did some very bad things. And that sometimes even within our lives, we do things that are really bad, utterly sinful. And yet the brokenness that was experienced by David shows us there is hope even at those times. We are not forsaken, we are not lost just because we do something terrible. There is redemption possible. David wrote a number of psalms that refer to the brokenness that he experienced. And I want to read to you this morning from Psalm chapter 5. I'm going to read just the first 7 verses. But this is very worthwhile for us to understand the state of mind that David was experiencing in his brokenness, but also the hope that is available because he hoped in our precious, mighty God. I would ask that you would stand and listen to the words of this scripture. Give ear to my words, O Lord. Consider my groaning. Heed the sound of my cry for help, my King and my God. For to you I pray. In the morning, O Lord, you will hear my voice. In the morning I will order my prayer to you and eagerly watch. For you are not a God who takes pleasure in wickedness. No evil dwells with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all who do iniquity. You destroy those who speak falsehood. The Lord abhors the man of bloodshed and deceit. But as for me, by your abundant loving kindness, I will enter your house. At your holy temple, I will bow in reverence for you.
Choose number 569 before the lesson. 569. Christ will meet his aid upon, never to fall, never to fall. While I find my precious Lord, sweeter than all, sweeter than all. Jesus is now and never will be, sweeter than all the world to me. Since I heard his loving call, Jesus is now and never will be, sweeter than all the world to me. Since I heard his loving call, sweeter than all, sweeter than all. When I reach the grave, sweeter than all, sweeter than all. Jesus is now and never will be, sweeter than all the world to me. Since I heard his loving call, sweeter than all, sweeter than all. Be seated, please.
Very important. Clock. Okay. As long as that clock's there, you all have hope. Sometimes little hands come along and they discover that, and if they remove that, well, that gives me unlimited time. I want to talk about David. I want to talk about this man who was a broken hero. There are so many lessons for us to draw from the life of David. And as a matter of fact, in your own personal Bible study, just the Son of God was mighty. And not only was mighty, is mighty. Because of the things that David did And particularly because of the things that David wrote in the Psalms, we benefit today. Some of the songs that we sing as our worship songs are words that were written by David himself. And so we benefit from that. But here is a man who is indeed a broken hero. Let me tell you the story about David. We learn about him in peaceful moments. And as such, he has such reverence, such respect for the king that actually would last for many years, even when King Saul started to lose his mind, which that's not a joke. He really went in some bizarre directions and tried on several occasions to kill David. And yet David respected the position of the king so much that in most of society, if we say David and, what does everybody say? Goliath. Because we love the story of David and Goliath. Everybody loves the story of David and Goliath. It is one of those stories that has been handed down, and people who don't even know about the Bible may know about David and Goliath. Because here he is as a young man. Best estimate, he was probably about 17 years old at the time. Where they were in this valley. On one side of the valley was the army of the Philistines, and on the other side of the valley was the army of Israel. And David was enthusiastic and was trusting God and was confident that God's army could accomplish whatever they would set their minds to do with the presence of God. And so he probably was somewhat surprised when he got there and saw that this army of God was being intimidated by the army. He was big, and he was scary, and he was threatening. And he would make fun of the army of the Israelites, and he called them out to fight. Well, David was just appalled. Who is this Philistine that he should stand against the army of the living God? David reasoned. And when nobody else stood up to go fight him, David was ready. And they tried to put on him the armor, and it just didn't fit. He wasn't big enough for the armor to work on him. But he knew that he really didn't need armor. He went into that confrontation not with the armor of men, but with the faith in God. He was a shepherd, and he had spent his days watching the sheep. Much of what he wrote at various times gives us insight to his experience as the shepherd, especially in places like when he wrote, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But in all fairness, what does a boy do when he's standing out in the middle of nowhere all by himself? He throws rocks. It's genetic, I think. But he didn't just throw them, he had his sling. And when we don't need to have in mind a wrist rocket or whatever you might have where you shoot a slingshot. We need to picture this sling that is the pouch at the end of some long straps of leather that build up an enormous centrifugal force. And with practice, it becomes a deadly weapon. There was a boy in our neighborhood when I was little who was able to put a rock through a stop sign because he had one of those, okay? Kind of scary. Well, David practiced with his sling. So when he was called on to go into battle, he's taken the weapon that he knows he's secure with. And the thing that we like about David is not just that he was willing to go, but he was anxious to represent God. And so here comes Goliath, and here comes David. And David doesn't go in an intimidated way. He goes running towards the giant. Well, you know the story. He takes a rock and he plants it in the middle of Goliath's forehead. And Goliath falls down. Sometimes we skip over the rest of the story. It gets really gory after that because David runs up and takes Goliath's own sword and cuts off his head. It's an amazing story because it's the story of a smaller force overcoming a greater force, apparently. But David had faith all along that the greater force was the presence of God. And we see that demonstrated there. And because of that, and because of other things shortly to come about in David's life, he begins to gain popularity. He becomes a part of that army. And then he becomes a captain in that army. And he has more and more influence until the people are starting to recognize him and give him great honor. There was a song that would be sung by the people that Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. And the reaction from King Saul was jealousy. A jealousy turned into hate, and a hate that turned towards threatening the life of David. And so for a number of years, David lived in threat of the king himself. There were a couple of occasions that David could have taken the life of the king, but he didn't do that because he respected the position. But David gained in power and gained in popularity until there finally